Lift your hearts up to the Lord.
Hallelujah, hallelujah. Spread the news that He is joy. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Sing to the mountains, sing to the meadows, sing hallelujah, God is joy.
Lift your hearts up to the Lord.
Hallelujah, hallelujah. Spread the news that He is truth. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Sing to the mountains, sing to the meadows, sing hallelujah, God is truth. Lift your hearts up to the Lord. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Spread the news that He is love. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Sing to the mountains, sing to the meadows, sing hallelujah, God is love. Sing to the mountains, sing to the meadows, sing hallelujah, God is love.
I'd like to welcome you all to Sunday service. My name is Peter. This is my wife, Marga. And it's our great joy and pleasure to share this with you, this Sunday service here. Special greetings to all the visitors and guests, especially at the Expanding Light, who are here for quite a number of programs of restorative yoga, a cleansing, a chakra program, and just personal retreats. So welcome. It's our pleasure to share service with you. I'd like to continue reading from Rays of the One Light, weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda, based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Our topic this week are, many are the pathways to truth. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. On the dedication page of Swami Kriyananda's book, The Path, appears the following account. A group of Paramahansa Yogananda's disciples had gone with him to see a movie about the life of Gyandev, a great saint of medieval India. Afterwards, they gathered and listened to the master explain certain subtler aspects of that inspiring story. A young man in the group mentioned another film he had seen years earlier in India about the life of Mirabai, a famous woman saint. If you had seen that movie, he exclaimed, you wouldn't even have liked this one. The guru rebuked him. Why make such comparisons? The lives of great saints manifest in various ways the same one God. The Bible contains a similar account in the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 9. And John said, Master, we saw one casting out devils in thy name, and we forbade him, because he followeth not with us. And Jesus said unto him, Forbid him not, for he that is not against us is for us. The more central a truth, the greater the number of contrasts in which it can be applied, contexts in which it can be applied. Truth is like a pure white light, containing within itself the full spectrum of the rainbow. Let no one tell you that what your path to God ought to be. Many are the paths. Select your own according to the dictates of your own nature, no matter how out of step that puts you with other people. Sri Krishna in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita states, trying even unsuccessfully to fill one's own spiritual duty or dharma is better than pursuing successfully the duties of others. Better death itself in the pursuance of one's own duties. The pursuance of another's duties is fraught with spiritual danger. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. This is from Whispers from Eternity, Prayer Demands by Paramahansa Yogananda. This one is, make me anything, a Christian or a Hindu, anything to realize thee. Let me be Christian, Jew, Hindu, Buddhist, Mohammedan, or Sufi. I care not what be my religion, race, creed, or color, if only I can win my way to thee. But let me be none of these, if that identity enmeshes me in an enclosing net of religious or social formalities. Let me travel the royal high road of realization which leads to thee. If I am traveling on some bypath of religion, lead me onto the one common highway of realization which leads straight to thee. Send me the sunshine of thy wisdom, that it lead me to the morning of my growing powers, and send me the moon of thy mercy to guide me rightly, if ever I am lost in the dark night of sorrow. So, many paths, one truth. Wouldn't it be nice if that was just really the way it was in this world? Right now, that everyone understood each other and all the religions came together. Well, unfortunately, even here in the 21st century, it's not quite like that. The one that's most in the news is the radical Islam and its association with terrorism and violence. And there's also the conflicts in the Middle East between the Jews and the Muslims in Ireland. Religious conflict is still with us. It's still with us around the world. And there was Pope Benedict just last week went to England for the first time that a pope visited England in the 500 almost years since Henry VIII decided that he didn't really want to have much to do with the Pope anymore. And the Pope was trying very hard to bridge the gaps and to create a oneness. He spoke of ecumenism among, he was mainly speaking among Christians. He didn't really get beyond the Christian faith, but he was trying to bring Christians together, and he left aside some of the big differences and even visited Canterbury, the head of the Anglican Church, which there's never ever been a pope who visited there before. And he spoke to the British Parliament, and he said, I'm worried that the marginalization of religion in this world, especially of Christianity, it's being pushed out of our daily life, and it's an important force. And he said, I really hope that we can bridge these gaps and bring some of these teachings back in. But then on the other hand, if you're maybe a parliamentarian in the British Parliament sitting there, you can say, well, there are some good reasons that we've separated some of these things out of the secular realm and the religious realm, because the more blood has been shed over religion than all the ambitions of all the kings in the world. And it's been a force for tremendous upliftment in the world of bringing people to greater honesty and kindness, of respect for their fellow man, of a greater socialization. But it's also been a great force for division, violence, and evil in this world, and bloodshed. And where do we come down with this? How do we try to understand that, how we are in the 21st century? And fortunately, we have a great avatar who came and who brought a lot of truth and a lot of light into this. And he can give us a lot of insights into understanding what's going on in the world religions. The first thing we need to do is to go back. We need to go look, well, how did we get to where we are? How do we get into this mess? And we need to understand a little bit about the cycles of consciousness on this planet, the yugas. And Sri Yukteswar and other great Indian sages taught about the cycles of time, the yugas, the cycles of consciousness. And the basic idea for those who are unfamiliar with it is that there's a great center of the universe that's emanating consciousness and upliftment. And our little solar system here is actually moving through space, and sometimes it's closer to the center of that galaxy, and sometimes it's farther away. And as we draw closer, there's a general upliftment of humankind. As we draw farther away, we're more in a dark age. Well, this whole cycle takes about 24,000 years to go around a complete cycle. And we've just come from the farthest away. We've come from Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga, there's a descending Kali Yuga 1,200 years and an ascending Kali Yuga 1,200 years that ended in about 1700 AD. And this is the darkest time. It's when there's the least amount of consciousness. And there can still be people who will rise above it. Jesus was born during that time, Muhammad. But generally the popular consciousness is fairly low. We didn't understand much beyond form, much beyond materialism, much beyond fixed places, hierarchies in societies. Well, guess what? This is where our religious traditions have by and large come from. If you look at Christianity started in descending Kali Yuga, and where it reached, just as Kali Yuga was about to reach its lowest point around 500 AD, Well, guess what happened a few years before that? That was when Constantine, the Roman emperor, embraced Christianity as the state religion. And it's when the organization of the Catholic Church really had its roots. There were bishops. There was one head of the whole religion. There were bishops under him, priests under them. Everything was divided into little sects, and they related to their priest and to the bishop and to the head. And guess what? It's still with us from the lowest point. And that was necessary at that time in Kali Yuga to really protect those understandings, to protect that truth. It had to be solidified into dogmas. Dogmas are simply the truth expressed so people can grasp them. Dogmatism, on the other hand, is when those truths and when those sayings become substituted for real experience of the truth. So unfortunately, people weren't very able to comprehend, and so this dogmatism was created, and that was what religion was. When did Islam become? Muhammad lived in the 7th century AD, slightly ascending, but still Kali Yuga. And he brought great teachings and a reform to a rather interesting society of in the Arab Peninsula. He brought great reform, great teachings, great upliftment was brought to that society of flourishing of science, of medicine, of institutionalism. Happened during that time as well. Well, the institutionalism, it's a great blessing. It's one of the great blessings, great contributions of the West, but it's also a great curse. Institutionalism allows for an organization, allows for forms, it allows for people to understand where these things have come from or what the teachings are, when there really wasn't so much room for inner realization. But this institutionalism is also a great curse, because what happens? The needs of the individual are subverted to that of the institution. Suddenly, it's not whether would you like to believe in this, it's if you don't believe in this, you will suffer eternal damnation. And if you don't believe that, we're going to kill you. So this institutionalism was imposed on religion because it was that form, that bulwark, that hierarchy that was needed at that time to flourish. Now you might say, well, what about the East? Well, some of the religions of the East avoided some of this curse and blessing of institutionalism, but they were still, that original inspiration was really dragged through the depths of Kali Yuga. The inspiration was lost. It was more into forms. The Hindu religion became identified with all the gods and goddesses and rituals and pujas, and some of that inner understanding was lost. Of course, it was kept alive, fortunately for us, by the saints. We'll get to that a little later. But, okay, as we move out of Kali Yuga into an ascending age, it's real interesting. I was just reading Catherine Kairave's book, Twin Souls, or Two Souls, Four Lives, about the life of Henry and William the Conqueror, who Master said, Yogananda said he was an incarnation of William the Conqueror. And Kriyananda feels strongly that he was Henry. Well, reading that book, here's our avatar, here's our Paramahansa Yogananda, a realized being, incarnates in the 11th century. So did he bring Kriya Yoga, and did he start talking about, energy and the chakras? No. What did he do? He actually reinforced institutionalism. This is a realized master, incarnated on a divine mission. His main thing was to try to get people from being incredibly egotistical, petty, killing each other all the time, trying to at least create some form, some central government, some central institutions that could bring a little bit of understanding, a little bit of the church back into it. It's a fascinating account, but my God, am I glad I didn't live in that era. I mean, they're just constant warfare and constant betrayal and people killing each other and call out the knights and invade this city and then we'll go over and build this castle and we'll, that siege. Wow, it's hard to believe there was an avatar there. But what he was doing was trying to at least keep that form together so that it could be born again and come up. So what happened? As we move out of the last stages of Kali Yuga, we come to the Reformation. The Reformation was an attempt by a number of people, primarily in Switzerland and Germany, to bring back a little bit of understanding away from this hierarchy, this form, to try to bring people back to an individual experience. What did they ask for? A direct experience of the Bible, people taking on the responsibility for their own salvation rather than paying a priest or paying somebody to uplift them. But what happened with that? People weren't quite there yet into this great spirit of oneness and diversity of religion. And so they spent a couple centuries shooting each other, killing each other, and the 30-year war, and there was Germany and Scandinavia were against the Holy Roman Empire, and it was pretty much bloodshed and chaos as usual. But then we moved finally into Dwapara Yuga. And the transition to Dwapara Yuga, 1700 to 1900, things got a little bit better. There was this secularization, there was the rights of the individual, there was the rule of law, there was separation of church and state, a little bit more understanding. We finally moved into Dwapara proper at the turn of the 20th century. And at that point, an awakening again to the spiritual truths that one could feel inside, an interest in Eastern religion coming through the 19th century and the earliest 20th century. And people actually starting an interfaith dialogue, starting an ecumenical movement to try to bring all the Christians back together. But what happened with this? Well, the forms and everything came with them from the past. And it was really hard to find common ground because everybody thought that their religion was infallible, unique, and exclusive. And it's pretty hard to have a dialogue when you think your teachings, there's no way that they're fallible and that this was a unique revelation and that, the rest of you, I'm sorry, but this is it. So it's pretty hard to have a dialogue when that's happening, what's going on. And the fact is that there are real differences among the religions. I mean, even the most basic things, thinking about, the soul or afterlife or God. Buddhists don't believe in God. Shintoists don't believe that there's a soul. And many Orthodox Jews don't believe in any afterlife. Well, how are you going to bring those things together? How are we going to find some common ground to move forward? Well, fortunately, at this point in time, at the early Dwapara Yuga, we had the incarnation of an avatar. Paramahansa Yogananda was sent here. And like many things in his teachings, he brought in great clarity and great insight that could sort of solve and bring all these religions together, all these difficulties that people have been having. And he always referred it back to the ancient teachings of India. And he said, yes, a lot of it has been lost over the years, but I'm coming back to bring the true teachings of Krishna and relating that to the true teachings of Christ. And what he said is he always referred it back to the tradition of Sanatan Dharma. Dharma is the right action, right path, or the right religion. And Sanatan is eternal, the eternal religion. And the Hindu religion, Hindu is just a word that was imposed by the British on there. Really, in this Indian subcontinent, the tradition there is known as Sanatan Dharma, this eternal religion. And more than any other tradition, this has been kept alive, the true essence, the true basic truths that all religions aspire to, that the purpose of life is moksha, or liberation. The way that liberation comes to one is internalization, seeking communion with Satchidananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss. It's the upliftment of consciousness. It's the upliftment of energy in the body as we move back to that oneness. This is what the Sanatan Dharma is. And all religions of the world have this at their core. Some of the revelations, this truth is, it says in the beginning of the reading, truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness in your deathless self within. Inside, there's this one truth. You can't change it. You can't reinvent it. You can't even have a new teaching. Kriyananda asked Yogananda, he said, is this a new religion that you're bringing? He said, no, this is a new expression of Sanatan Dharma, of the eternal religion, because there is nothing new. That truth is one and eternal. It's there. And all the religions have had at least some glimpse of that. Now, it's not to say that all religions are equally tuned into that, or after their trip through Kali Yuga have been able to preserve some of that. But basically that spark is there. And it's that center which is what the basis of cooperation of unity in the religion is. There's that center fundamental experience. It's not a dogma, it's not a dogmatism, it's a fundamental experience within ourselves of that one truth. And Kriyananda expounded on this in a wonderful way in his book, The Hindu Way of Awakening. And in there he brought the attention to two ways. He said the way of belief and the way of awakening. And he said, okay, think of it as this truth, this eternal truth is the center of the wheel, this center of the being. And radiating outward from that are ways of belief. These are the outward traditions, rituals, beliefs, dogmas that have been defined to help people. As you get farther away, each spoke is farther away from each other. So the Muslim way of belief out here is quite different than the Hindu way of belief out here. But there are also other spokes that are leading back to that center. And that's the way of awakening. It's the way that we can bring ourselves to unite with that one center, that one oneness, to bring it in. And the ways of our awakening are what we can find commonality, that we can find unity in the religions. Because the closer we get to that center, the more common the experience. The more we focus on the outward, on the material, and especially the farther we get from that center, the less common ground you're going to find. The rituals are quite different. Beliefs are quite different. The whole traditions are quite different. There's inevitably a historical, economic, social context that those things evolved in, which are quite different. And you're probably not going to find unity in it. But we can find unity the closer we get to the center in this way of awakening. And especially this insights that we have with this Hindu or the Sanatan Dharma way of awakening. Because Sanatan Dharma, it really encompasses all practices. That's the great beauty and strength of the Indian tradition, that it admits all paths in here. It says, oh yeah, that's just a way of awakening. It's another way of arriving at this truth. And who are the keepers of that truth? They're the saints of of religions. And the closer you get to the center, the closer the greater the realization of the saints, the less disagreement there are. You never saw too many saints that were starting jihads or holy wars or crusades. The saints agree. And there's an interesting story that Master included in his autobiography, in Paramahansa's Autobiography of a Yogi. He went in 1935 to visit in Europe, in Bavaria, Teresa Neumann, who was a stigmatist, a young Bavarian woman who didn't eat, didn't drink, and weekly had visions of the Passion of Christ. And she would go through very vividly living this, including the stigmata, blood would come, she would bleed from the wounds as Christ had wounds from the sword of the Roman soldier, and finally it would finish in the joy of the resurrection. Well, Yogananda had heard about this saint and wanted to go see her, and he sought her out in Bavaria, and they looked through southern Germany, and they were trying to find her, and they went from one village to another, and the local bishop was trying to protect Teresa Neumann from curiosity seekers, and her family as well, so she was a little protected and not necessarily able to see people, or not just anyone could go to see her. But Yogananda found her and said, I'd like to see this. And she, of her own accord, said, yes, I will see the man of God from India. She knew nothing of Yogananda. She didn't know who he was, where he came from. Just another curiosity seeker. Yet she had that realization, that center, as did Yogananda, and they just knew each other on that level. And Yogananda, as it says, as you read in the autobiography, did go to see her. He experienced that passion with her. He experienced the vision of Christ. And there was a great communion on that level. Of course, that communion was later denigrated by people of the church saying, as if a Hindu could have a Christian vision. So, the people out here don't necessarily understand. The saints in here, they do understand. Okay, so where does that leave us? What do we do now with, we found an avatar, we found a path of Sanatan Dharma. Should we try to say, well, let's get this one true path here. Now, if we know what we're doing, and this is the way. Well, that sounds a lot like, exclusive and unique. No, we don't want to do that. And it's not the right thing anyway, because one of the things it says in Hinduism is that every soul is unique. It's a spark of the divine, yet it's unique. And its own path back to that center, back, is going to be unique. And everybody needs a slightly different path. There's the paths of yoga, of karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, raja yoga. We need all these different paths, all these different ways of relating back to the one. So let many paths bloom. Let that diversity be out there, because we need it. We all need to find our own different way. So what about engagement in this world? What do you do with all these millions of people who haven't quite realized about Sanatan Dharma and haven't quite gotten it about this, this center and ways of awakening? I mean, you just love to be able to, send an Ananda minister over to one of the schools in Afghanistan and say, look, imams, here. You got some really good stuff right here. This is, this revelation from Muhammad. It's wonderful. It's bringing people to God. It's uplifting consciousness. It's bringing you to center. That's fabulous. But, you also got some cultural overlays from the 7th century Arabic peninsula here. And, we could let that go right now, because that's not really being helpful. And you're kind of getting bad karma for doing that, and violence. And, you could just imagine. It would be wonderful if people believed this. But you probably wouldn't get very far. And, even in our own society, Yogananda said ignorance is 50-50. I mean, I don't know how many of you read this last month about Terry Jones, he's a preacher in Florida who has a congregation of all of about 50 families down there in Gainesville, Florida, and they have a 20-acre church there, and he has billboards on his land that says, Islam is of the devil. And he proposed that 9/11, we commemorate that day by burning the Quran. And he actually put this out, the wonders of social networking. He put this out on Twitter or Facebook, and suddenly it blew into this whole international thing, and people were burning in Iran, were burning pictures of Terry Jones, and here people were threatening to burn the Quran, and he finally backed off, but he got onto the talk shows, and he's this whole hoopla, and you just like to come there and sit down, Terry, I mean, come on. Okay, there's the way of awakening here, and the Quran has a piece of that way of awakening. And this stuff about burning that, that's just leave that alone. That's Kali Yuga. I mean, we're not there anymore. But the chances are, I don't know if he's going to listen to you. He's probably not. He's probably not tuned into that because there's still all this socio-political ego stuff that's going on with religion. So what do? Do we just say, oh, forget it. I'm going to go hide out at Ananda, just practice meditation, and, this is a great path. I have a great avatar, and let the world be damned. They're going to blow themselves up anyway, and just let it go. Well, I don't think that's quite the right attitude either. There is great upliftment. There is great inspiration. There is great things happening in the religious traditions. And it's sort of what we've got. I mean, without that, Yogananda said the true tension, the true fight should not be between religions. It should be between this religious ways of awakening and the materialistic, the atheistic trend that's in here. And you can understand why Marx said, religion is the opiate of the masses, and why so many scientific materialists just say, oh, forget this whole thing. I mean, you guys are just killing each other, and you're all saying different stuff, and you can't prove any of it. It's ridiculous. Well, you can see how that came into being, but Yogananda spoke very, very strongly against that. He said one of the things he spoke out most against was godless communism. Communism, this whole movement, sought to put it all in a material context, all of man's life. There is no higher realities. There is no upliftment of consciousness. There is no expansion of sympathies to include others. It's just all a materialistic thing. He said, no, we have to fight that. Well, how are we going to fight that? I mean, there's organized religion out there, and we need to do what we can to help engage with that, to help the dialogue continue. It's going to be a long, slow process, but to speak and to live our truths, to continue the dialogue, talk about meditation, and it's happening. These teachings are moving out. Master didn't just come for self-realization fellowship or Ananda. He came to change consciousness for the whole age. How are we going to do that? It's through a gradual change and a gradual understanding. There's also, I want to warn a little bit against, I think it's really easy for us to say, well, we've sort of got it down. We've got a much better framework that makes a lot more sense than some of these organized religions. And, our way, we know what we're talking about. But that can lead to a certain pride, a certain hubris. And the reality is we're not realized beings, and we're still probably stuck in some truths, some dogmas that are helping us, but we don't really understand them yet. We're not fully realized in that dogma yet. And so be a little careful and just be open to the presence of God wherever you see it. And this was something I was thinking about a little bit as in the last couple weeks and then previously. And it's, there was a saint in India who said, there were a bunch of villagers who were just chanting the Lord, and he said, oh, the Lord's name is sweet, whether it's chanted by the ignorant or the wise. And just, there are people with a deep connection to God, and just to recognize that and to honor that, whether or not they understand about the chakras and the afferent, efferent current and the rising of the spine. I mean, don't worry about that. They're going in the right direction. Those who are not against us are for us. There was an interesting example I had of this. We spent some time in Spain. Marga's from Spain, and when we were first married, we stayed there for a length of time. And there was a friend we were staying with her parents. There was a friend of the family who came by every day on her way to Mass. She would go to Mass every day. She was this little, about 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide, and this little elderly woman. But she had a great spirit, a great vivacity, a great relationship with God. She would go to Mass. Especially with the Virgin Mary, she would just be talking to her all the time. And, it was a simple devotion. And it's like Yogananda said, there was a spastic, was one of the disciples named Horace, and Yogananda said, well, Horace is almost there. You know, God is very pleased with his devotion. And other disciples are trying to understand that. Said, because he was a spastic, and he said, it must be a very simple devotion. And Yogananda said, yes, that's what God appreciates most, is that simple devotion. So honor that simple devotion, no matter what faith or what path it comes from. Honor that. The last story I just want to say is recently I had the fortune of going back to a family reunion in Kansas. And my father's family is all from there. All four of his grandparents emigrated on the same ship in 1874 as a village. 400 of them picked up from a village in the Ukraine and plunked down as a congregation in Kansas. And they were Mennonites, which is a sect of Anabaptism similar to the Amish and the Hutterites. And they had actually been, since the 16th century, 17th century, moving around in different places in Europe as a village, seeking religious freedom, seeking to understand as they could understand, to relate directly to the Bible, to not have any interference, to choose their own faith. And they emigrated to Kansas and kept this faith alive through their church. And it was real interesting to go back there because I had sort of dismissed that in my, I'm a yogi and I really know what's going on here. But, sort of their simple faith. But it was an incredible journey of faith that they took and that kept them together. And I went to a Sunday service there, and the church is still very vibrant. It's the third church they've had on the same place, which is right next to my grandfather's farm. And, two of them burned down, and they've built the third one, similar to here. But it was a very vibrant, wonderful congregation. There was a lot of light. And guess what the sermon topic was? The sermon was dialogue with Islam. And they didn't condemn it. They said, he didn't give up some of the exclusivity of the way of Jesus Christ, but he said, live in that. Live what Jesus taught, and then share that. And then as you reach out, people will realize the power of Jesus Christ. And I was impressed. There's light there. They are moving towards that center. So don't condemn the outer religion. Do what you can to be an example of living in that center, of engaging with it, of showing what meditation can do, of showing these other techniques, of putting it in that broader framework. And gradually, we will bring all to this path, that one true path of self-realization that Master said, that's the religion of the future, that it's not one sect, it's not one church, it's not one way of belief. It's the paths, the ways of awakening to that one eternal, deathless center where truth is.